They made him wait for 2 hours in that emergency room. They looked through him the way people look through things they've decided don't matter. What none of them knew, what not one person in that building had thought to check, was that the man sitting in that plastic chair in the corner had built the chair, the room, and everything around it. 2 hours, 120 minutes in a plastic seat beneath fluorescent lights, pressing a folded cloth against a wound that needed attention, watching the staff move around him with the practiced efficiency of people who have learned to prioritize without always understanding what they are prioritizing and what they are not. He did not complain. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach into his jacket and produce the documents. That would have changed everything in an instant. The credentials, the identification, the name that was mounted on a bronze plaque on the wall 12 feet from where he sat. He simply waited because he had been waiting his entire life. And he had learned, in the particular school that certain people attend without ever choosing to enroll, exactly what waiting revealed about a place and the people in it. What it revealed here would change this hospital forever. Stay with us, because this is not just a story about one man in one emergency room on one November evening. This is a story about what we see when we look at another person and what we miss when we don't look at all. This is a story about the weight of a name that nobody read and what happened the moment someone finally did. Raymond Cole was born in 1962 in a 3-room house on the eastern edge of Birmingham, Alabama, the second of 4 children born to James and Dorothy Cole. James worked at the steel mill. Dorothy cleaned houses 5 days a week and sang in the church choir on Sundays with a voice that people in the congregation still talked about decades later. They were not wealthy people. They were not connected people. They were people who understood, with the bone-deep clarity that comes from living close to the margins, that the distance between where you are and where you want to be is crossed one step at a time, and that the crossing requires everything you have. Raymond had understood this early. He had been the kind of child who paid attention, not just to his schoolwork, though his schoolwork was exceptional, but to everything around him, to the way the world was organized, to who had access to what and why, and what it cost when access was denied. He had understood these things not as abstractions, but as lived realities, processed through the specific experience of growing up black in Birmingham in the 1960s and 1970s, in a city that was still working through the aftershocks of its own history with a slowness that was sometimes progress and sometimes the illusion of it. The thing that set Raymond's course was not a single moment but a single absence. When he was 9 years old, his younger brother Marcus, 6 years old, bright-eyed, the family comedian, developed a severe asthma attack on a Sunday afternoon in July. Dorothy bundled him into the car and drove to the nearest hospital, which was 20 minutes away. They waited in the emergency room for 4 hours. Marcus was seen by a nurse after the first hour, given a cursory examination, and told to wait for a doctor. The doctor arrived after the 3rd hour. By that point, Marcus had stabilized on his own, his small body having fought through the crisis without medical intervention. Because the medical intervention had not come in time, he was fine. He recovered completely. But Raymond, sitting in that waiting room for 4 hours watching his brother struggle to breathe, had understood something that would shape every subsequent decision of his life. He had understood that the system that was supposed to protect people did not protect everyone equally, that the waiting room had a hierarchy invisible to the clipboard and the schedule, but completely visible to the people inside it, that some people waited longer, that some people were seen less clearly, that some people had to fight harder just to receive what others received without asking. He decided, sitting in that plastic chair at 9 years old, that he would fix it. Not the specific hospital, not the specific waiting room, but the thing underneath it, the assumption, the hierarchy, the invisible calculus that determined whose pain was urgent and whose could wait. It took him 30 years, but he did it. Raymond Cole graduated valedictorian from his high school in 1980. He attended Morehouse College on a full academic scholarship, graduating summa cum laude in biology in 1984. He completed his medical degree at Johns Hopkins in 1988. his residency in emergency medicine at Massachusetts General in 1992, and his fellowship in hospital administration at Harvard Medical School in 1994. Along the way, he published 11 papers on emergency care equity, testified before Congress twice on healthcare access for underserved communities, and began, quietly and methodically, the process of building something. The first Cole Medical Center opened in Atlanta in 1998. It was a community hospital, built in a neighborhood that had been without adequate medical care for decades, staffed by physicians who shared Raymond's belief that excellent medicine and equitable medicine were not in tension but were, in fact, the same thing. It was funded by a combination of grants, private donations, and Raymond's own savings accumulated over years of living well below his means, of driving used cars and wearing worn shoes and putting every discretionary dollar toward the thing he was building. The second Cole Medical Center opened in Birmingham in 2003. Raymond chose Birmingham deliberately. He chose the city of his childhood, the city of that waiting room, the city where his brother had struggled to breathe for 4 hours. While the system moved at its own pace around him, he built the second hospital 3 miles from the first hospital he had ever sat in, and he made sure it was everything that hospital had not been. The third Cole Medical Center, the one that matters to this story, opened in Memphis, Tennessee in 2009. It was the largest of the three, a full-service hospital with a level-2 trauma center, a pediatric unit, a women's health center, and an emergency department that Raymond had designed himself, in consultation with emergency medicine specialists, patient advocates, and critically, patients from the communities the hospital was built to serve. He had spent 2 years on the emergency department design alone. He had thought about the waiting room specifically, about the chairs, about the lighting, about the flow of information between desk and patient, about the invisible hierarchies that accumulate in spaces like this, and what it took to interrupt them. He was proud of what they had built. He believed in it with the specific, earned conviction of a person who has turned a lifelong purpose into a concrete reality. On the evening of November 14, 2024, Dr. Raymond Cole was driving home from a meeting at the Memphis Cole Medical Center's Board of Directors, a routine quarterly review that had run 2 hours long, as board meetings always seemed to when he was involved in a minor car accident at an intersection 6 blocks from the hospital. The accident was not serious. The other driver was unhurt. Raymond's car sustained damage to the front left panel, and Raymond himself sustained a deep laceration on his left forearm from a piece of glass that had come through the window on impact. The wound was bleeding steadily, not dangerously, but enough that it needed attention, enough that driving home and treating it himself was not a reasonable option. Raymond pressed his handkerchief against the wound, waited for the police to arrive and take the accident report, exchanged information with the other driver, and then walked the 6 blocks to his own emergency room. He was wearing civilian clothes, dark trousers, a gray sweater, a winter coat with a torn left sleeve where the glass had come through. He had no hospital identification on him. It was in his office, as it always was when he wasn't working. He had no stethoscope, no white coat, no visible marker of who he was or what he had built. He walked through the automatic doors of the Memphis Cole Medical Center Emergency Department at 7:43 p.m. on a Thursday evening and approached the triage desk. He was 61 years old. He was bleeding through his handkerchief, and he was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. The triage desk at the Memphis Cole Medical Center Emergency Department was staffed that evening by 2 nurses. The senior of the 2 was Patricia Simmons, a registered nurse with 11 years of experience, 7 of them in emergency medicine. She was competent, efficient, and genuinely committed to her work, the kind of nurse who remembered patients' names and noticed when someone in the waiting area looked worse than they had an hour ago. On most evenings, she was exactly the kind of person you wanted at a triage desk. This was not most evenings. This was a Thursday in November, and the emergency department was running at 112% capacity, which was not unusual for a Thursday in November and was, in fact, not unusual for any evening of the week. The Memphis Cole Medical Center Emergency Department served the catchment area of approximately 340 people, a significant proportion of whom had limited access to primary care and used the emergency room as their primary point of medical contact. Raymond had known this when he designed the department. He had staffed for it as generously as the budget allowed. He had fought for additional resources at every board meeting for 15 years. It was still never quite enough. That was the nature of the problem he had dedicated his life to solving. You could build the hospital. You could staff it. You could design the systems. But the underlying conditions, the poverty, the insurance gaps, the food deserts, the environmental factors, the decades of underinvestment in community health, those conditions kept producing need faster than any single institution could absorb. Patricia was on her fourth consecutive hour without a break when Raymond walked in. She had triaged 23 patients in those 4 hours. She had de-escalated to arguments in the waiting area, coordinated to ambulance arrivals, and managed a medication error flag that had required 45 minutes of documentation. She was tired in the specific, bone-deep way that emergency medicine nurses get tired, not sleepy, but worn. The way metal wears when it has been under sustained pressure. She did not look up when Raymond approached the desk. "Signing on the sheet," she said. Her voice was not unkind. It was simply the voice of a person operating at capacity. The voice that conserves energy by removing everything non-essential from communication. "Someone will call you. I have a laceration on my left forearm," Raymond said. His voice was calm. "It's been bleeding for about 40 minutes. Patricia looked up then, a quick, professional assessment, the kind that takes approximately 2 seconds and produces a preliminary triage category. She saw an older black man in civilian clothes, a winter coat with a torn sleeve, a handkerchief pressed to his forearm. She noted the blood on the handkerchief. She made a determination. "Fill out the intake form," she said, sliding a clipboard across the desk. "We'll get you seen as soon as we can. We're running about 90 minutes right now." Raymond took the clipboard. He filled out the intake form: name, date of birth, insurance information, nature of complaint, and returned it to the desk. Patricia took it without looking at it, added it to the stack, and turned back to her computer. Raymond found a seat in the waiting area. It was a plastic chair, blue, attached to a row of identical chairs by a metal rail. He sat down carefully, keeping pressure on his arm, and looked around the room. The waiting area held approximately 30 people. A young mother with 2 children, one of whom was coughing with the wet, persistent cough of a serious respiratory infection. An elderly man with his arm in a makeshift sling, clearly in considerable pain, who had been there, based on his positioning and demeanor, for some time. A teenager with headphones who held his right hand at an angle that suggested a fracture. Several people whose conditions were not immediately visible, but who share the particular quality of stillness that descends on people who are hurting and have been waiting long enough to stop expecting relief. Soon Raymond looked at them all with the eyes of a man who had designed this room. He noticed the lighting, the fluorescent overhead panels that he had specifically requested be supplemented with warmer indirect lighting on the perimeter, which they were. He noticed the information board on the wall, the digital display that was supposed to show current wait times and which was, he noted, showing a wait time that was already 40 minutes out of date. He made a mental note about that. He would mention it at the next operations meeting. He pressed his hand against his arm and waited. The first hour passed. The digital board updated once, moving the estimated wait time from 90 minutes to 110 minutes. Raymond watched several patients be called from the waiting area. The teenager with the possible fracture, the elderly man with the arm sling, 3 others whose situations he couldn't assess from where he sat. He noticed the order and thought about it with the part of his brain that was always, even in a personal crisis, analyzing systems. The young mother with the coughing child was still waiting. Raymond had been watching the child for 40 minutes. The cough had a quality, a depth, and a frequency that concerned him. He was not currently practicing clinical medicine. His role for the past decade had been primarily administrative, but he had 30 years of medical training behind him, and the training does not leave you And what he was hearing from that child's chest was not nothing. He stood up and walked to the desk. Patricia was on the phone. The second nurse, younger, a name tag that read Kevin, was entering data into a computer. Raymond waited until Patricia ended her call. "Excuse me," he said. "The child in the third row, the one with the persistent cough. She sounds like she might be developing a lower respiratory infection. I'd suggest moving her up in the queue." Patricia looked at him. Then she looked at the child. Then she looked back at Raymond with the expression of a nurse who has received unsolicited medical opinions from waiting room patients before and has developed a response protocol for it. "Sir, our triage staff will assess all patients according to our protocols," she said. "If the child's condition warrants escalation, it will be escalated." "I understand," Raymond said. "I'm not questioning the protocol. I'm flagging a specific observation." "Thank you for your concern," Patricia said, and turned back to her computer. Raymond returned to his seat. He looked at the child. He looked at the wall behind the desk, the long wall, the one that faced the waiting area, the one he had specifically chosen for the installation of the donor recognition display that had been mounted there in 2011. The display was a series of bronze plaques, each engraved with the names of the individuals and organizations whose contributions had made the Memphis Cole Medical Center possible. The plaques were arranged chronologically, starting with the founding donors. The largest plaque, centered at eye level, read, "Memphis Cole Medical Center founded 2009 in memory of Marcus James Cole." So that nitrogen monoxide one waits the lone doctor, Raymond A. Cole. Founder Raymond looked at his name on the wall. He looked at his brother's name. He looked at the words his mother had suggested for the dedication, words she had spoken at the opening ceremony in 2009 with the same voice she used to sing in the choir, clear and full and entirely without self-pity. He pressed his hand against his arm and sat back in the plastic chair and waited. The second hour began. Kevin Marsh was 26 years old and had been a registered nurse for 14 months. He had chosen nursing after 3 years of working as an EMT, drawn by the same thing that draws most people to emergency medicine: the specific satisfaction of being useful in the moments that matter most, when the distance between intervention and catastrophe is measured in seconds, and the tools you carry are all you have. He was good at his job. He was still learning the speed, the particular velocity of an emergency department, the way it required you to hold 12 things in your mind simultaneously and move between them without losing any. But his instincts were sound, and his attention was genuine, and his patients, almost without exception, felt cared for in the specific way that matters most, which is the way that says, "I see you. I am here. You are not alone in this." He had been watching the man in the blue chair for 40 minutes. Not continuously. Kevin's attention was not available for continuous deployment in any single direction, but recurrently, in the way that something keeps returning to your peripheral vision when your brain has flagged it as worth monitoring. The man was older, well-dressed in a quiet way, pressing a cloth to his left forearm with steady, consistent pressure. He had not complained, had not approached the desk repeatedly the way some waiting patients did, had not displayed the escalating anxiety that Kevin had learned to watch for as a precursor to a difficult interaction. He had simply sat there, calmly, with a quality of stillness that Kevin, who had learned to read waiting rooms the way sailors read weather, found unusual. Not the stillness of resignation, not the stillness of withdrawal, something else. The stillness of a person who is entirely present in their circumstances and has made a decision about how to be in them. Kevin had also been watching the child. He had heard the cough from across the room, had heard it for the past hour, and had been tracking its progression with the part of his attention he kept permanently allocated to the ambient sounds of the waiting area. The cough was worse, not dramatically, not in a way that would have triggered an immediate escalation flag under the current triage protocol, but worse in a direction and at a rate that Kevin thought warranted a closer look. He pulled up the child's intake form on his screen. 8 years old. Temperature recorded at triage, 99.8. Chief complaint, cough and difficulty breathing. Triage is non-urgent. Estimated wait time 100 minutes. Kevin looked at the time. The child had been waiting for 73 minutes. She had another 27 to go before she hit the estimated wait window, and given the current volume, it would likely be longer. He looked at the child. He looked at the man who had come to the desk 40 minutes ago to mention the child, and had been sent back to his seat. He made a decision. Kevin stood up from his station. "Pat, I'm going to do a floor check," he said, in emergency department language. A floor check was a walk-through of the waiting area, a secondary assessment pass, informal. Not part of the official protocol, but practiced by nurses who had learned that. The official protocol did not always catch everything. Patricia nodded without looking up. She was managing 3 things simultaneously and trusted Kevin's judgment. Kevin walked the waiting area. He checked in with several patients, asked brief questions, made quick assessments. When he reached the young mother, he knelt down to the child's level. "Hi there," he said. "I'm Kevin. What's your name?" "Destiny," the child said, and coughed, a deep, rattling cough that told Kevin everything he needed to know. "Destiny, can you take a deep breath for me?" She tried. What came out was not a deep breath. What came out was the shallow, labored inhalation of airways under significant compromise. Kevin looked at the mother. "How long has she been breathing like this?" "Since this morning," the mother said, and her voice had the quality of someone who has been worried for hours, and has been holding the worry together through the sheer effort of being present and calm for her child. "It's been getting worse." Kevin stood up. He turned and walked back to the triage desk with a speed that was not quite a run, but was not walking either. "Pat," he said, his voice low and direct. "Destiny Simmons, 8 years old, row 3. We need to move her up. Now." Patricia looked up. She read Kevin's face. In 14 months of working together, she had learned that Kevin's face at this specific frequency meant something real. She was already reaching for the phone as he turned from the desk. Kevin's eyes moved across the waiting area and landed, as they had been landing periodically, on the man in the blue chair. The man was watching the scene with Destiny with the quiet, focused attention of someone who understood exactly what was happening and what it meant. Kevin walked over to him. "Sir," he said, sitting down in the adjacent chair, the posture that says, "I'm giving you my full attention. I'm sorry for your wait. Can I take a look at your arm?" The man looked at him. There was something in his eyes, a warmth, a recognition, something that Kevin couldn't fully read but that felt significant in a way he couldn't immediately articulate. "Of course," the man said. He removed the handkerchief from his forearm. Kevin examined the wound. It was a deep laceration, approximately 4 centimeters, with clean edges, glass. Most likely, that had been bleeding steadily but was now beginning to clot at the margins. It needed irrigation, closure, and a tetanus assessment. It had been bleeding for. "How long ago did this happen?" Kevin asked. "About 2 hours," the man said. Kevin looked at him. 2 hours, and you've been here about 2 hours, the man said. Kevin held his gaze. Then he looked down at the wound again, and then back up, and said, "I'm going to get you into a room right now. I apologize for the wait." "That's too long for this," the man nodded. "Before we go," he said, "can you tell me, the little girl, Destiny, she'll be seen quickly?" "Yes," Kevin said immediately. "She's being moved up right now." The man nodded again. He stood up slowly, the movement of a person who has been sitting in the same position for 2 hours and whose body is registering the time, and followed Kevin toward the treatment area. As they passed the triage desk, Kevin reached for the man's intake form from the stack to bring it with them. He glanced at it as he walked, reading the information the man had written: name, date of birth, insurance. Kevin stopped walking. He read the name again. He looked up from the form. He looked at the wall across from the triage desk, the donor recognition display, the bronze plaques, the large center plaque with the name in letters 12 inches tall. He looked at the form. He looked at the wall. He looked at the man standing beside him. "Sir," Kevin said. His voice had changed in a way he couldn't control. "Are you?" "Yes," the man said quietly. "I am." Kevin stood in the middle of the emergency department hallway holding the intake form and feeling the specific, vertiginous sensation of a person whose understanding of the last 2 hours has just been completely restructured. He had been here for 2 hours, Kevin would say later, in the conversation that would eventually reach the hospital's board of directors and the medical community beyond it. 2 hours, bleeding, in his own waiting room, and nobody read the wall. The treatment room was small and clean and efficiently arranged, which was exactly what Raymond had specified when he designed it. He sat on the examination table while Kevin irrigated and closed the laceration with the focused, careful technique of a nurse who took his craft seriously. Raymond watched him work and said nothing about the quality of the technique, though he noticed it. He had learned, over decades of medical administration, that unsolicited professional assessments from patients, even patients who happened to be physicians, were rarely welcome and never helpful. "You're going to need a tetanus booster," Kevin said, applying the final closure strip. "When was your last one?" 2021, Raymond said. "I keep records," Kevin nodded, making a note. He worked in silence for a moment, and Raymond could see the thing Kevin was holding. The weight of the last 2 hours. The knowledge of what had happened and what it meant, pressing behind his professional composure. "You can say it," Raymond said. Kevin looked up. "Say what?" "Whatever you've been not saying since you read the form." Kevin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry. I should have come to you sooner. I noticed you. I was tracking you. But I didn't move fast enough." "Why not?" Raymond asked, not accusingly, genuinely. Kevin thought about it. "Because you weren't escalating," he said finally. "You weren't displaying the markers that our training tells us to prioritize. You were calm. You were managing it. And I think," he paused, "I think I let that be a reason to keep moving." Raymond nodded slowly. "That's an honest answer. It's not a good enough answer." "No," Raymond agreed. "It's not, but it's the right place to start." He looked at his arm, at the neat row of closure strips Kevin had applied. "How long have you been here?" 14 months. "Do you like it?" Kevin blinked at the shift in direction. "Yes, I do. I like it a lot, actually." "Why?" Kevin considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because it matters," he said. "What happens in this room, this specific room, on this specific shift? It matters to real people in real ways. I can see it. I can measure it. In a lot of jobs, you can't always see whether what you did made a difference. Here you can." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "That's why I built it," he said. "That exact reason." Kevin set down his materials. He looked at Raymond with the expression of a young person who is in the presence of something significant and knows it and is trying to figure out what to do with the knowledge. Double quotes, "Dr. Cole," he said. "What are you going to do about tonight?" Raymond reached for his coat from the chair beside the table. "I'm going to go home," he said. "Get some rest. Come back tomorrow. And then?" Raymond looked at him. "And then I'm going to fix what's broken. The same thing I always do." The story of what had happened in the Memphis Cole Medical Center Emergency Department on the evening of November 14th traveled the way stories travel in hospitals, fast, and with the particular distortion that comes from passing through multiple tellings. Before it reaches anyone with the authority to act on it, Kevin told his charge nurse, Sarah Okafor, immediately after Dr. Cole left the treatment room. Sarah Okafor told the night supervisor, Dr. James Park, within the hour. Dr. Park, who had been with the hospital for 6 years, and who understood both the institutional significance of what had happened and the personal significance of it, made 2 phone calls, one to the hospital's chief medical officer and one, after a moment's consideration, to Dr. Cole's personal assistant, who had Dr. Cole's personal cell number and the judgment to know when to use it. Dr. Cole's phone rang at 10:47 p.m. He was home by then, his arm properly dressed, a cup of tea on the table beside him, a medical journal open in his lap that he had not been reading. Raymond. It was the chief medical officer, Dr. Angela Reeves, a woman he had hired 12 years ago. One of the best decisions he had made in a long career of consequential decisions. Her voice had the particular quality of a person who is angry and is managing the anger with great care. I just heard. I know, Raymond said. Why didn't you say something? When you were there, why didn't you identify yourself? It was the question everyone would ask. Raymond had known it was coming. He had been thinking about his answer since he sat down in that plastic chair and felt the specific quality of the waiting room's attention, or rather, it's an attention, because I wanted to know, he said, a pause. Know what it's like for the people who come in here without a name on the wall, who are just people, who are bleeding and hurting and waiting and don't have anything to produce. That changes the way they're seen. He paused. I wanted to know if what we build is doing what we build it to do. Another pause. Longer. And Angela said, and it's not, Raymond said quietly. Not completely. We've built something good. Something genuinely good. I believe that. But there are gaps. There are places where the systems we design are working, and places where the culture hasn't caught up to the systems. Tonight was a culture problem, not a protocol problem. A culture problem? Angela was quiet for a long time. What do you want to do? I want to have a conversation, Raymond said. A real one, with the staff who were working tonight. Not a disciplinary conversation, an honest one, about what happened and why and what it tells us about the work we still need to do. Patricia Simmons, Angela said. She's a good nurse, Raymond. She was at capacity tonight. I know she is, Raymond said. And I know she was. That's part of the conversation. He paused. Capacity is a systems problem. What she did with that capacity, that's a culture problem. Both of them are mine to fix. The conversation lasted another 40 minutes. By the time it ended, Raymond had outlined a plan, preliminary, subject to revision, but clear in its direction. He would convene a meeting with the emergency department staff. He would bring in external expertise to conduct a culture assessment. He would redesign the triage training to include specific content on implicit bias and its clinical consequences. He would establish a patient experience monitoring system that included real-time feedback, not just post-discharge surveys, and he would do something else, something smaller but, he thought, perhaps more important than all of it. He would change the intake protocol so that every nurse at every triage desk, at the start of every shift, walked the perimeter of the waiting area and read the walls. Not to check the plaques, not to honor the donors, but to see the room from the patient's perspective, to stand where the patients stood and look at the space the way a person looks at a space when they are hurting and afraid and hoping that someone will notice them. He fell asleep that night with the plan forming in his mind. The way plans had always formed for him, not as abstract strategies, but as concrete sequences. Step by step by step, the way you cross a distance, asterisk Patricia Simmons found out at 11:30 p.m. when Sarah Okafor pulled her aside in the staff quarter between the end of her shift and the parking structure elevator. Sarah told her simply and directly, which was the right way to tell someone something like this. No preamble, no softening. Just the facts, stated clearly, with the specific respect of a colleague who trusts you to handle truth. Patricia stood in the corridor and listened. When Sarah finished, Patricia said nothing for a moment. She looked at the floor. Then she looked up. He was here for 2 hours, she said. Yes, he came to the desk. He flagged the child. Yes, and I sent him back to his seat. Yes, Patricia nodded slowly. The nod of a person who is not arguing with what they are hearing because there is nothing to argue. She had processed the evening's events in her mind 100 times in the hours since it happened. She always did this end-of-shift review, running through the decisions she had made and assessing them, and she had found things she would do differently. The child, specifically. She had noted Kevin's concern about the child and had acted on it, but she had not acted on it fast enough. That was on her. That was a real failure, and she owned it. But the man in the blue chair, she had not known. She had triaged him as non-urgent based on a visual assessment and a standard intake. His wound had been bleeding but not dangerously. He had been calm and coherent. By the protocol she had been trained in. She had made a defensible decision. She understood, standing in that corridor, that defensible and right were not the same thing. She also understood, and this was the part that was harder to sit with, the part that required more from her than the professional acknowledgement of a procedural error, that the calmness she had read as stability had required something from him, that he had been managing the situation from a position of significant experience. With situations like this one, that his composure was not evidence that he was fine. It was evidence that he had learned to be fine in circumstances that were not. Patricia drove home. She sat in her car in her own driveway for 15 minutes before going inside in her kitchen. She made a cup of tea she didn't drink and sat at the table and thought. She was 43 years old. She had been a nurse for 11 years. She had worked in emergency medicine for 7 of those years, and she believed. She had always believed that she brought her full attention and her genuine care to every patient she encountered. She thought about whether that was true. She thought about it with the specific, uncomfortable rigor of a person who has been shown a gap between who they believe they are and what the evidence suggests. She thought about the man at the desk, about the way she had not looked up when he walked in, about the quick assessment she had made to seconds, a professional reflex, and what had fed that reflex. She was trained to triage quickly. She was trained to assess and categorize and move on. That was the job. That was what kept the department functioning at capacity. But quick assessment was not neutral. Quick assessment drew on pattern recognition, and pattern recognition drew on everything: training. Yes, but also experience, and experience was not a clean thing. Experience carried freight. It carried the accumulated weight of a lifetime of assumptions, most of them unexamined, most of them operating below the level of conscious thought. Patricia was not a person who thought of herself as someone with biases. She was a nurse. She cared for everyone who came through her doors. She did not, she would have said with complete sincerity, treat patients differently based on how they looked. But the man in the blue chair had sat in that waiting room for 2 hours, and she had looked through him, not maliciously, not deliberately, but completely. She sat at her kitchen table and held that fact and did not try to explain it away. The next morning, Patricia arrived at the hospital 40 minutes before her shift. She went to the emergency department and stood at the triage desk before it was staffed, before the morning shift arrived. In the quiet of a department between one wave of need and the next, she looked at the waiting area, the blue plastic chairs in their rows, the information board, updated now, accurate, the windows letting in early morning light. Then she turned and looked at the wall behind the desk, the donor recognition display, the bronze plaques, the large centered plaque with the name in letters 12 inches tall. She read it. She read all of it, the hospital's name, the founding date, the dedication to Marcus James Cole, the words "so that no one waits alone," and the name at the bottom. Dr. Raymond A. Cole, founder. She had walked past this wall thousands of times. She had looked at it, registered it, the way you register familiar things in a familiar space, but she had not read it. Not really. Not with the attention that reading requires. She read it now. She stood there for a long time. When Dr. Cole arrived at the hospital at 8 a.m., Patricia was waiting outside his office. She was in her scrubs, ready for her shift, her hands clasped in front of her with the specific composure of someone who has decided what they need to do and is doing it. "Dr. Cole," she said when she saw him, "I'd like to speak with you, if you have a few minutes." Raymond looked at her. He recognized her. He had a good memory for faces. Always had, and he knew who she was and what the conversation was likely to be about, of course. He said, "Come in." They sat across from each other in his office, the office he had occupied since 2009, the one with the view of the courtyard that he had designed to have a garden in it, because he believed that patients and staff both needed to be able to see something living. When they looked out a window, Patricia spoke first. She said what she had come to say without deflection and without excuse. She told him what she had seen and what she had done and what she had not done. She told him about the child, about the delay she owned, and about him, about the 2 hours, about the way she had not looked up when he walked in. She did not cry. She was not a person who cried easily, but there was something in her voice, a rawness, the specific rawness of someone who has done the uncomfortable work of honest self-examination and is presenting the results that Raymond recognized and respected. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," he said. Patricia looked at him. "For what?" For coming. For saying it the way you said it. For not making it something it isn't. He paused. Can I ask you something? Yes. When you sent me back to my seat after I mentioned the child, what were you thinking? Patricia considered the question honestly. I was thinking that I had 23 other patients in a waiting room at capacity, and a phone ringing. I was thinking that I didn't have time for an unsolicited opinion from a waiting patient. She paused. I wasn't thinking about who you might be. I wasn't thinking about what the opinion might be worth. I was just moving, keeping the machine running. Raymond nodded. That's the job, he said. That's what we ask of you. And it's also, sometimes, the problem. When the machine runs fast enough, we stop seeing what we're running past. Yes, Patricia said. The answer isn't to run slower, Raymond said. We can't. The volume doesn't allow it. The answer is to build better checkpoints, better prompts, better ways of interrupting the pattern before the pattern causes harm. He looked at her steadily. That's on me as much as it's on you. More, actually. I designed this system. If the system has gaps, I own the gaps. Patricia looked at him for a long moment. You built this hospital, she said, in memory of your brother. Yes, so that no one waits alone. Yes, she was quiet. Then she said, last night, you waited alone. Raymond looked at the courtyard garden outside his window. A November morning, the trees bare, but the evergreen plantings green against the pale sky. Yes. He said, I did. A long silence settled between them. Not an uncomfortable one. The silence of two people who have arrived at something true together and are taking a moment to be in its presence. I'd like to be part of fixing it. Patricia said finally, whatever comes next, whatever the process is, I want to be in it. Raymond looked at her. Good, he said. I was hoping you'd say that. Asterisk Marcus Cole was 58 years old and lived in a house on the same street in Birmingham, where they had grown up. 3 blocks from the house that was no longer standing, but that both brothers could still map from memory every room, every floorboard, every window, and what it looked out on. He was a high school science teacher, had been for 30 years. He drove a 10-year-old Subaru and coached the chess club on Tuesday afternoons and was, by every measure that mattered, exactly the person he had always been, curious, warm, and capable of taking himself too seriously, and possessed of a laugh that arrived without warning and filled whatever room it was in. He had a slight wheeze when he exerted himself. Had since he was 6 years old. He managed it, had always managed it, with the practiced ease of someone who has made peace with a body that requires a little extra attention. He carried an inhaler. He avoided certain triggers. He had, across 52 years of living with it, developed an intimate understanding of his own respiratory system and a complete absence of drama about it. He found out about the Memphis incident the same way he found out about most things that happened to Raymond through their sister Diane, who called on a Friday morning sounding exactly the way she always sounded when something significant had happened, which was like herself but with additional energy. Did Raymond call you? Diane asked. Not yet, Marcus said. He was in his classroom 32 minutes before the first bell, grading lab reports. Why? Diane told him. Marcus set down his pen. He listened to the whole thing, the accident, the walk to the hospital, the 2 hours in the waiting room, the intake form, Kevin reading the wall. When Diane finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment. He didn't say anything, Marcus said. When he was there, he didn't tell them, no. Of course he didn't. Marcus said this with a specific, affectionate exasperation of a person who has known someone their entire life and understands them completely. Of course he just sat there. He called Raymond that evening. Raymond answered on the second ring, which meant he was at home and not in a meeting, which was the most reliable indicator available. Hey, Raymond said. Hey, Marcus said. Diane told me. I figured she would. You sat there for 2 hours. Yes, you were bleeding. It was manageable. Raymond, Marcus, a pause. The pause of two brothers who have been having conversations like this for 50 years and have developed their own shorthand for them. You build that hospital because of me, Marcus said, not accusingly, just stating a fact that they both carried. I build it because of what happened to you. Raymond said, "There's a difference. What happened to you was wrong. The hospital is the response to the wrong. You're not the reason. The wrong is the reason." "Okay," Marcus said. "But also me, also you." Raymond conceded. "And last night you sat in the waiting room of a hospital you built in my memory and you bled for 2 hours and nobody saw you." Raymond was quiet. "That's something." "Raymond," Marcus said, "that's a real thing. I know it is. How do you feel about it?" Raymond thought about the question. He thought about the waiting room, about the plastic chair, about the donor display on the wall with his brother's name on it in letters 12 inches tall, about the 2 hours. "I feel like I understand something now that I understood theoretically before." He said, "I've known, for 30 years, that the experience of waiting in an emergency room is different depending on who you are. I've read the research. I've designed systems to address it. I've given speeches about it." He paused. "Last night I sat in it. That's different." "Yes," Marcus said, asterisk. "The chair is the same chair I specified," Raymond said. "The lighting is the one I designed. The information board, we upgraded it. The intake forms, I rewrote them in 2019 to reduce the cognitive burden on patients in distress." A pause, "And I still waited 2 hours, because the chair and the lighting and the forms aren't the thing." Marcus said, "No, they're not. The thing is whether the person at the desk sees you." "Yes." Raymond said, "That's exactly it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You're going to fix it," he said. "Not a question. I'm going to try. We're going to try. It's not a one-person fix. It never was," Marcus said. "That was always true." He paused. "Raymond, the thing Mom said at the opening, so that no one waits alone. You remember? Of course, she meant it for the patients. But she also meant it for you. You were never supposed to fix this alone either." Raymond was quiet for a long time. Outside his window, the Memphis evening was settling into dark, the city lights coming up one by one across the skyline. "I know," he said finally. "Good." Marcus said, "Now get some sleep. You've got work to do tomorrow." Raymond smiled, a real smile, the kind that arrives without effort. "When did you get wise?" "I've always been wise," Marcus said. "You just talk too much to notice." Raymond laughed. It felt good. It felt like something that had been held for a long time being set down in a safe place. "Good night, Marcus." "Good night, Raymond. Fix your hospital. Working on it." He hung up the phone and sat in the quiet of his home office for a while, listening to the city. Then he opened his laptop and began to write the memo that would start the process, the honest, direct, institutional memo that would describe what had happened and what it meant, and what they were going to do about it. Beginning immediately, he wrote for 2 hours. When he finished, he read it through once, made 3 small corrections, and sent it to Angela Reeves with a note, "For all staff distribution, Monday morning. No edits. This is what happened, and this is what we're going to do." Then he closed the laptop, turned off the light, and went to bed. The memo went out on Monday morning at 7 a.m. It was 3 pages long. It began with a simple, direct statement of fact. On the evening of November 14th, the founder of the Memphis Cole Medical Center presented to the emergency department with a laceration requiring treatment and waited 2 hours before being seen. It described what had happened during those 2 hours with specificity and without deflection. It acknowledged the systemic and cultural factors that had contributed to the situation, and it outlined, in concrete detail, what was going to change. The memo was not an apology document. It was an accountability document, which is a different thing. An apology document describes what went wrong and expresses regret. An accountability document describes what went wrong and describes what will be done differently. Raymond had written both kinds in his career. He believed firmly that the second kind was the one that actually mattered. The staff response was significant. Raymond had expected mixed reactions, some defensiveness, some resistance, some concern about blame, and there was some of all of that. But the dominant response, which surprised him in its breadth and its depth, was relief. The relief of people who work inside a system and can see its gaps, and have wanted to talk about them and have not had a clear invitation to do so. The relief of people who care about what they do and want to do it better. and have been waiting for someone to make that conversation safe. He held the first all-staff meeting the following Thursday. He sat at the front of the room, not behind a podium, not at a table, just in a chair facing the assembled staff of the emergency department. And he talked about the night. He talked about his brother. He talked about Birmingham in 1971. He talked about what he had set out to build and what he believed they had built, and where he believed the gap still was. And then he stopped talking, and he asked them to talk. What followed was 2 hours of the most honest institutional conversation Raymond had participated in since the earliest planning meetings for the first Cole Medical Center in 1996. Staff spoke about the pressure of the volume, about the speed at which they were required to make decisions and what that speed cost, about the ways in which training and protocol had been designed to produce efficiency, and how efficiency, in certain conditions, produced a different kind of cost. Patricia Simmons spoke. She said what she had said in Raymond's office, and she said it in front of her colleagues with the same directness and the same absence of excuse. The room was very quiet when she spoke. Several people nodded. Several people looked at their hands. A few people looked like they were thinking about things they had not thought about in exactly this way before. Kevin Marsh spoke about the child, about the 40 minutes, about the decision he had made to delay, and what had made that decision feel reasonable in the moment and what he now understood about why it shouldn't have. He was the youngest person in the room, and he spoke with a clarity that made him seem considerably older. Raymond listened to all of it. He took notes on a legal pad, actual notes, not performative ones. He was gathering information that would feed the next stage of the process. The external culture assessment began the following month. A firm that specialized in healthcare equity, researchers and practitioners who had done this work in dozens of hospital systems across the country conducted interviews, observed workflows, reviewed data, and produced a report that was 48 pages long and did not pull its punches. It identified 8 specific areas where the Memphis Cole Medical Center's culture diverged from its stated values. It made 31 concrete recommendations. Raymond read every page. He discussed it line by line with Angela Reeves and with the department heads, and with a newly formed patient experience advisory board that included, at his specific request, former patients from the communities the hospital served, people who had sat in those plastic chairs, who knew the waiting room from the inside, whose perspective on what it felt like to be seen or not seen in that space was the most important data available. The changes were implemented over the following 8 months. Some were structural, the intake protocol, the triage training, the real-time feedback system. Some were cultural, the all-staff conversations, the bias awareness curriculum, the shift in how performance was measured and what behaviors were recognized and rewarded. All of them were monitored, tracked, adjusted based on what the data showed. The waiting room floor walk, the practice Raymond had conceived in his kitchen on the night of the incident, became a standard, part of every shift handoff in the emergency department. Each incoming charge nurse walked the perimeter of the waiting area at the start of their shift. They read the walls. They looked at the patients from the patient's perspective. They carried that perspective back to the desk with them. It was a small thing. It took 4 minutes. Raymond believed it was one of the most important changes they made. Kevin Marsh was accepted into a nurse practitioner program the following spring. Raymond wrote one of his letters of recommendation. It was, Kevin told him later, the best letter he had ever received, and he had read it more times than he was prepared to admit. Patricia Simmons became one of the most active participants in the hospital's equity training program, not as a subject, but as a facilitator. She had a gift for creating the specific conditions in which honest conversation became possible, and she used it. She would say later, in an interview with a healthcare equity journal, that November 14th was the worst professional night of her career and the most important. Destiny, the 8-year-old girl with the cough, was diagnosed with pneumonia and treated successfully. She was discharged after 4 days. Her mother sent a card to the emergency department that was posted on the staff bulletin board and remained there 4 years. It said, "Thank you for seeing us. It meant everything. Raymond read that card every time he passed the bulletin board. He read it the way he read the plaque on the wall, not just seeing it, but reading it, taking it in, letting it mean what it meant. In the spring following the incident, Raymond was invited to speak at a national conference on healthcare equity. He stood at the podium of a large conference hall in Washington, D.C., and looked out at an audience of hospital administrators, physicians, nurses, and policymakers, people who had built systems and were trying to make those systems work for everyone. He told them what had happened in Memphis. He told it simply and directly, without drama, the way he told all important things. He told them about the 2 hours, about the plastic chair, about Kevin reading the wall, about Patricia sitting at his kitchen table and saying what she needed to say. Without excuse or deflection, he told them about his brother, about Birmingham in 1971, about the waiting room where Marcus had struggled to breathe and the decision Raymond had made, sitting in a plastic chair at 9 years old, about what he was going to do with his life. I built 3 hospitals, Raymond said. I've spent 30 years designing systems to address the inequities that I saw and lived and studied. And on a Thursday evening in November, I sat in my own emergency room for 2 hours, bleeding, while the staff I hired and trained and trusted moved around me without seeing me. He paused. The room was very quiet. I'm not telling you this story to assign blame. The staff at my hospital are good people doing a hard job under impossible pressure. I'm telling you this story because I think it contains something important about the gap between what we build and what we actually create, between the systems we design and the culture that runs inside them, between the values we state and the habits we practice. He looked out at the room. The plaque on my wall says, "So that no one waits alone." I put those words there in memory of my brother. I meant them when I put them there. I mean them now. But meaning something and building it, those are 2 different acts. And the second one is never finished. You build it and you learn and you find the gaps and you build it again. You keep going. That's the work. That's all the work ever is. He stepped back from the podium. The room was still quiet for a moment. And then the applause began, and it built. And it was the kind of applause that sounds like more than applause, the sound of people who have heard something true and are responding to the truth of it. Raymond Cole stood at the podium and listened to it and thought about his brother, about his mother's voice in the choir, about a 9-year-old boy in a plastic chair in a waiting room in Birmingham, making a decision about Kevin Marsh, reading a name on a wall in a Memphis quarter and understanding, in an instant, what 2 hours meant about Patricia Simmons, arriving 40 minutes early to stand in an empty waiting room, and read what she had walked past 1,000 times. About destiny, breathing clearly now, somewhere in Memphis, growing up in a world that had, on one specific night, done slightly better by her than it had done in our before. Small things, incremental things, the kind of things that are invisible from a distance and enormous up close. Raymond Cole had learned, in 61 years of showing up, that the distance between invisible and enormous was crossed one step at a time, and that the crossing required everything you had, and that it was worth it. It was always worth it. If Dr. Cole's story stayed with you, share it. And tell us in the comments, have you ever been in a room where no one read the wall? Subscribe for more stories about the people who keep building anyway. We'll be here.